Okay, I know this player wasn't all that good, but I hope to change some of your perspectives on him. Let's talk about Brendan Smith and how useful he was on the Devils roster, but not in the way you're thinking of. We have a lot to talk about in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Elliott scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed him. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils writer for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. Another year, another instance in which Patrick Elias was left off the Hockey Hall of Fame ballot. In other news, Alexander Mogilny still continues to wait, and I don't know what Rod Brind'Amour did to piss off the committee, but he was also left off the ballot. So there you go. I think we could all agree that we have no idea what goes into electing someone into the Hall of Fame, and I think a lot of people have their own opinions about the committee and the choices that they've made recently. But my thing is, I think Elias wholeheartedly deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I did an episode on the matter in yesterday's show, so check that out if you hadn't done so already. But we're not going to sit here and harp on the decision yet again, because otherwise I'd be doing it every single year. No. We're going to talk about Brendan Smith and his impactful season behind the scenes, because as we all know, Smith was inconsistent in terms of playing time, and when he was on the rink, he wasn't all that big of a factor. But there's a reason why Devils media loves Brendan Smith. They love talking to him, and I was no different from a lot of people, which was I thought Brendan Smith was pretty much useless. I didn't know what his impact was. I wanted him gone. I wanted him waived. I think I said that at some point midway through the year, but having spoken to Brendan Smith at exit interviews, which was the first time that I ever spoken to him, it was definitely an eye-opening, I would say, interaction, just because I was able to get a different side of Brendan. And I was like, wait a minute, this is what he does within the Devils locker room. And maybe it's one of the reasons why they were so successful. So in the first segment, we're going to talk about his season in general, because it wasn't all that impressive. But at the same time, when you hear Smith speak, I'm sure you guys will also start to see maybe he is useful just in a different sort of way. And then in the second segment, we're going to talk about what he said about the team in general, because I think that speaks more volume to his character, because he's all about the team. He's not all about himself. He's very realistic with how his playing ability is, and he was very impressed with what his teammates were able to do on the rink throughout the course of the season. And then in the third and final segment, I'll talk about his future with the team, because he will be back with the Devils organization next year, because he has 1 year remaining on his contract. But I might say something that a lot of people might disagree on, but we'll get there when we get there. So why am I doing this Brendan Smith-centric episode? Well, here's the thing. As you guys know, he is the older brother of Riley Smith, who plays for the Vegas Golden Knights, and he recently won a Stanley Cup. So I've been meaning to do this episode for quite some time, but last week, obviously, Jesper Bratt had signed his lengthy extension, and that was more of a priority for me to talk about on this show. But I wanted to get to it because, like I said moments ago, Brendan is an interesting player. Now, in terms of his actual play on the rink, wasn't all that eventful, but I will give credit where credit is rightfully earned, which is Brendan Smith was actually up there in a couple of key categories that I don't think a lot of people are going to recognize. So when looking at Smith and his season in general, it was very under the radar because he appeared in 60 games. He had 0 goals, 5 assists for a grand total of 5 points. He had a plus-minus of +3, and he was second on the team in penalty minutes with 63. Right ahead of him was Miles Wood. And when looking at defensive point share, he ranked 9th on the team. So to give you some reference, Ryan Graves is ahead of him. Dougie Hamilton was ahead of him. Jonas Siegenthaler was ahead of him. John Marino was ahead of him. Damon Severson was ahead of him. So below him, someone like Kevin Ball. But like I just said moments ago, Smith had appeared in 60 games. Ball had only appeared in 42 games. Then you could look at someone like maybe Nikita Ohotuk, but Ohotuk only appeared in 10 games. So I would say in terms of the amount of games he did appear in, Smith ranked dead last amongst Devils defensemen in defensive point share. However, he was sixth on the team in blocks with 76, and he was actually second on the team in hits with 102. So here are my initial thoughts on Smith when the Devils obtained him last summer. I was a little confused with the signing, if I'm going to be completely honest, because here's the thing. I don't think defense was all that of a priority last offseason for Devils, because obviously you had Ryan Graves, you had Dougie Hamilton, Damon Severson, and I was just basically like, if we sign Smith to a contract, isn't he going to be taking a roster spot away from somebody? Because I was projecting for someone like Kevin Ball to be given a chance to be playing more consistently. Or at the time, I thought Nikita Ohotuk was ready to be given a full starting position on the roster or be given more game appearances. And I was also thinking about Shimon Nemeth. I was thinking about Luke Hughes. So basically, I was a little confused. But the only thing I could say about Smith was that he had been in the league for a good while. Obviously, he's played with the Detroit Red Wings, the New York Rangers, the Carolina Hurricanes. He's appeared in the playoffs multiple times. So that was my initial reaction, which was obviously we're not getting him for what he could do on the rink, but he's a veteran player. He's been in that situation before. And I was just like, okay, he might not play all that many games, but maybe he can be a leader amongst the young players, because I'll tell you what was a priority for the Devils last offseason. They needed more veteran pieces because they were so young. And lo and behold, the Devils were able to perform much better because you signed those veteran pieces like Andre Palat, Eric Haula, Brendan Smith, because they've been in that situation before. And what they do on the rink might not always impress people, but it's what they do in the locker room. It's what they do to the young players. It's how they interact with the coaching staff. So I think that speaks more volume to those veteran pieces because they're the unsung heroes. And we'll talk more about that a little later in the episode. But here's the thing. I said early on in the episode that come midseason, I was anticipating for Brendan Smith to be waived because I was just thinking in the back of my head, I was like, okay, he's not really doing all that well. He's racking up all the penalties. Yes, he seems to have his teammates back at times, but my thing was like the performance just isn't there. But this was back in November. This was before I got credentialed, and Christy Flannery of the Hockey News appeared on my show, and I told her my opinions, and she was able to shed a new light for me because she did the same thing for Eric Haula, and she did the same thing for Brendan Smith. She was like, I love talking with Brendan in the locker room. He's a great guy. He's very knowledgeable, and I didn't understand it at first, but after getting credentialed, and I'm sure a lot of you saw it when you were watching the exit interviews on the Devils' YouTube page, which is you just saw how knowledgeable Brendan Smith was. You just saw like, oh, I did not think of him in this sort of way. Or maybe you knew for a good while because obviously Brendan Smith has done pregame or postgame interviews before. So I think the thing for Brendan Smith is that, yes, he gets sort of a bad rep for what he does on the rink, because he is a bit of a bonehead, for lack of a better term, because he does rack up all those penalties, and it seems the only thing that he knows how to get efficiently. But the one thing that I was able to learn from Smith was just that sometimes it's not what you do on the rink, it's what you do in the locker room. And is it a cliche thing to say? Because a lot of people are going to be like, oh, yeah, it's not about skill, it's about heart, it's about determination, it's about working hard. Well, that is true to an extent. And I think Brendan Smith is the epitome of it. I had the chance to ask Smith during exit interviews, like, what is he going to work on so that way the playing time can be just a tad more consistent and maybe we could see a better outcome from him. Here's what he told me.
You talked about being a veteran on this team, and obviously you talked about how the team can improve, and I know that the playing time wasn't all that consistent. What are you going to work on so that way we can see you on the rink every day kind of thing?
Yeah, for myself, I can't control if I'm in or not. I'm proud of myself because I think that I can still play, and that's a good thing for myself. There's times where you doubt yourself because you're not in the lineup, but I wake up and I show up and I bring it in practice regardless. And I didn't have as many playoff games as I hoped but my playoff games that I played and I came in, I thought I played very well. And so that's what I'm proud of. For me, I've been doing this for a long time. I'm just going to continue to do what I've done in the last previous years and just get myself ready and prepared for the season. Like I said, I liked my year. I was happy with how I played. You get what you get with me. It's pretty simple, and I'm not going to change that. I just kind of bring it every day, and hopefully next year I'll be as good and maybe better. So that's an interesting question, but that's something that I'll try to work on in the summer is keep getting stronger and be prepared.
The one thing I want to highlight from that soundbite is that you get what you get from Smith, and at the end of the day, he's not going to rack up the numbers. He's not going to be all that efficient. But at the same time, I think the Devils need a player like Smith, and it was proven just this past year, which is despite the Devils being so young, despite having our young core still relatively not all that experienced, because obviously you got Nico Hischier, Jack Hughes, and Jesper Bratt, it was very evident that once you got those veteran pieces, players who have been in that situation before, you're able to take your organization to the next level. And that's what the Devils were able to do because they were able to exceed expectations. And yeah, we're going to talk about Jack Hughes and his surgeons and the fact that he was able to stay relatively healthy. We could talk about Hischier, same circumstance, was able to stay healthy, and he was able to have a very productive year. Jesper Bratt, still able to remain consistent. Vitek Vanecek, he had a big performance in the net throughout the course of the regular season. Kira Schmidt stepped up his game during the playoffs. Dougie Hamilton had an offensive surge for defensemen. John Marino, Jonas Siegenthaler, despite not putting up the offensive numbers, they knew how to hold down the fort on the defensive side of things for the Devils. But the unsung heroes are the veteran players because obviously we talk a lot about Andre Palat and sometimes the production not being there. We talk a lot early on in the season that the goal scoring for Eric Holla just wasn't there, and he was very unlucky. And for Brendan Smith, yes, we complain about his penalties, but the one common denominator that Smith, Holla, and Palat have is that they've been in playoff situations before. They've been around the block a tad bit more. So I want people to have that sort of perspective when discussing Brendan Smith, and it's something I have to adapt as well because I have to realize that sometimes it's not about what you do on the rink. Sometimes it's about what you do behind closed doors. So we're going to talk more about this matter momentarily. But before we continue, let me tell you guys about FanDuel because baseball season is in full swing and there's no better place to get in the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets. If your first bet doesn't win, just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today so you don't miss out on a chance to snag a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Okay, so I'm going to play a soundbite from Smith because Amanda Stein asked him during exit interviews, like, how did he feel about the team's performance? And this was actually the first question she asked. And why is it so significant? We'll talk about that momentarily. But enjoy the soundbite.
What has it been like for you as a first-time player here, as a veteran, seeing everyone do what they did?
I mean, if we look back at that year, it's pretty impressive. And I think if you look around the room, you can basically go through each stall and say, everybody took a huge step, right? And I think as a young group, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for growth. Our record obviously speaks for itself. I think the best thing about the entire year is that people counted us out, maybe not even making the playoffs, and we made a run for first place. And even talking to some of the guys in Carolina after we lost, which obviously still stings, but it's going to sting for a little while here. But they were like, "You guys are really good," and took everybody by storm, and that's a good thing to hear. They were like, "Hey, you guys were sniffing right behind us the whole time at the end of the year. So like, you guys are a good club," and it sucks that you want to win the last game of the year, right? And hoist the cup. It's not in our cards this year, but what we did. We just want to keep improving from that and take that a bigger step next year. And I guess that's the focus for here. We're going to do all our exit meetings and try to get everybody on the same page for the summer and come back and get prepared. And I think, in my mind, the fan base has been waiting for this for a very long time, and it was fun to have them pack the house, enjoy, be loud, and get some excitement back for the Devils. And for me, it was very exciting to be a part of it.
So obviously I can't speak for Amanda, but I can make a pretty good educated guess as to why that was her first question, because she knows what Smith is all about. Smith is all about the team. He's all about just having that different perspective and just seeing like how they can perform. He knows his own skill set. He knows his limitations. So the one thing for Smith is that I found interesting that the question wasn't like how satisfied was he with his overall season. It was more of him talking about the team and basically having high praise for his teammates. And I think that really showcases what Smith is all about. And it's something I've been preaching on today's episode. So I really commend Amanda for asking that type of question. Obviously, she's been doing this for a good while, so she knows the team like it's the back of her hand. But I found that quite impressive, and that I think that's the perspective that Amanda was going with, which is she knows that Smith is more about just the team. He's more about being a team player, and she knows that maybe Smith won't have that much to say about his own overall game, but he'll have a lot to say about his teammates and what he saw from his perspective. And I commend Smith for being a good sport about this, because once again, he didn't score a single goal. His playing time was inconsistent. And during the playoffs, sometimes he was the scapegoat, because I go back to the first series against the Rangers. Game 2, he plays in favor of Jonas Siegenthaler, which I don't agree with the move at all. And that did hurt the Devils a little bit. But he was able to redeem himself come game 3 in the second round against the Carolina Hurricanes, because he was able to set up Jack Hughes on a good dime, and Hughes was able to score. So that's my thing for Smith, which is he is the epitome of a team player. And before I talk about how useful that could be going forward, let's play another soundbite in which he talked about how he knew that this team was going to get it going. Also, listen closely to the certain words he uses to describe some of his teammates.
Thought we were starting to get on the same page just before the season. We felt pretty good about it. Obviously, we lost the first 2 games, and then there was Fire Lindy chants and the whole thing. But once we beat, what was it, Anaheim, I believe, and then we started a little bit of a roll there. So you could say Anaheim. I don't believe it was Anaheim. I think it was a little bit before that. Unfortunately, we lost the first 2 games, and then you just get the same old Devils kind of thing, but that's not how we felt. And then once we won that game and then started that push, that's kind of when we were guys like myself, I can't speak for Pally or whatnot, but I felt hey, this is starting to come together. It's feel good. It was changing. It felt like, for me, hearing the stories in the past, that it was changing at that moment. So that was exciting. And then what we did from there was pretty impressive, and it was fun for all of you guys. It's fun for us, and it's because we're all on the same page. We're all trying to move this ship forward and get everybody in Jersey on the same page. And I thought we did a good job of that. And I really truthfully believe that the sky's the limit with this club. I mean, you got Jack's I don't even know if he's reached his full potential, right? So, and you have a young captain in Nico. There's so much untapped potential, and we're getting close. So I think that guys like Pally and even Halla and the older guys, trying to help these guys go through it, I think it was a very successful year in my book. The more games we played, the better we were. It's hard because I remember it feels like yesterday, my first playoff run, and every game I got better. And I know I'm older now, but I'm still getting better in playoffs, because it's just the more you do something, the better you're going to be at it. And that's what we were seeing. I thought since going through it, the games, we just got better. And it's just a familiarity for what playoff hockey is. It's different than regular season. You guys know it. We see it. once you're actually lace them up and you're out there, you're like, wow, this is a totally different game, and you have to adjust to it. And we did a good job with the coaching staff to adjust to certain team systems and how the Rangers played to how Carolina played, and we did a good job with that. So understanding what playoff hockey is a big thing, and to get that many games, it's just going to make the club better.
Can I just say I love Smith a whole bunch more just because he was saying things that I usually say on this show, which is untapped potential, talking about how Jack Hughes hasn't even reached his peak yet. He hasn't even reached his prime. I love Smith a whole bunch more because those are some of the phrases that I use on this show when to describe some of the players on the Devils roster. Yes, they're generic, but Brendan, I hope you are listening to Locked On Devils because two great minds think alike. I'm just kidding. I just thought it was really cool, but ultimately, Smith is 100% right when talking about Jack Hughes, when talking about Nico Hischier. He also talked about Lindy Ruff, and I played that soundbite in an earlier episode. But it's so useful to have Smith on your roster because the question I had last offseason for Devils was, who's the leader? Who's the guy who's pulling the guys up by the bootstrings? Who's that person who's able to just settle the team down when things are getting a little rough? Because every team needs veteran pieces in order to succeed. It's one of the reasons why I thought the Devils would perform a lot better. Yes, they got better by default, but they added some more veteran pieces, and it's so useful. And I don't want people to underestimate their true impact because they're the unsung heroes, and there's a lot of unsung heroes on the Devils roster, and I think that's the case for any other team. But when talking about Brendan Smith, when talking about his future with the organization, which we'll talk about more about in segment 3, I want people to think of it from this perspective, which is there's a reason why Smith has not been cut. There's a reason why Lindy Ruff will go to him for certain game outcomes. There's a reason why Smith maybe plays in more games than he really should be playing in, but it's because Ruff sees how well his teammates respond to him. So we can sit here all day and talk about skill, but the one thing we can't really gauge fully upon is chemistry. And it seems like Smith has great chemistry with the team. So similar to Eric Halla, Smith is starting to convert me a little bit. I went from being I guess you could say a Smith hater or a Smith doubter to now saying, look, I'm not going to sit here and say that I think Smith is one of the best players on the Devils roster. I'm not going to go that far, but I will say that he is very useful. And I don't think a lot of people see it from that sort of perspective. And I think Smith deserves a lot more credit for the leadership he was able to demonstrate in the locker room because how he was speaking to us at exit interviews, I think it carries outside the locker room into the practice rink, pregame, postgame, wherever the case might be. Everyone needs someone like Brendan Smith, and he's a very likable person. And if you couldn't tell from the interviews, he went into great detail for every answer. He seemed very fond of it. And he never got tired of it. He made sure to answer everyone's question in the same amount of detail. So I want people to think of that when they think of Brendan Smith, which is, yes, you can have your opinions in terms of his skill set. I know I have my own opinions and I've shared it on this show. But at the same time, I think Smith, it can be utilized as a good leader in the locker room. And I think that's why Lindy Ruff is so fond of him. Okay, so now here's an interesting question. Smith has 1 year remaining on his contract, so he'll be back on the roster come next year. But what happens after that, especially if the Devils are able to maintain that same success? Well, Smith was able to answer that question as well because he talked about his own play style and he talked about where his impact could be best utilized. Here's what he had to say.
I think I can still play in this game, in this league. I think I help the team. But I actually believe that maybe my leadership and my vocal game might be more impactful to this kind of club than my actual game on the ice. And there's things that when there's TV timeouts or whatever, that's when I have to talk and be vocal and keep everybody on the same page and make sure that we're all moving in the same direction. And a lot of times you just need players like this, and I understand that. I'll never say that my game isn't good because I know that I can still play in this league, and I'm a top 6 in my opinion, and other people can have their own opinions, but for me that's how I feel, and I'm going to keep trying to help this club move in the right direction, help these younger guys grow, because when they do, the team will get better, and we will continue to be, like you said, something for the fans to be able to watch for years to come, because we have that core group.
I just love how aware he is, how he knows that he's not the best player on the rink, and maybe his vocal leadership can be better utilized in the locker room, at practice, and maybe not so much on the rink. And he says that people will have their own opinions on him. And like I said, I have my own opinions on him, but I can see why Christy was so fond of him when she appeared on my show back in November, because like I said, I was pushing for Smith to be cut. I was saying he's useless out there. And I even did it throughout the course of when I was credentialed, because I didn't really get the chance to speak with them and see it from a different perspective. And I should have honestly watched more YouTube videos of him doing interviews. And I hope a lot of you do the same thing afterward. But yeah, in terms of him and his future on the team, quite honestly, if there's room, I'd be willing to bring him back for maybe 1 or 2 years on a very cheap deal. His contract is already cheap, so it's no harm, no foul. And he doesn't have to play every single game, but he could sort of be that veteran piece, that glue piece that ties everyone together. And you can have multiple type of those players, because I describe the same way for Eric Holla, because Eric Holla, not only is he very good on the rink, he's very good in the locker room as well. And he's able to demonstrate that leadership. So for Brendan Smith, that's my ultimate truth for him, which is he's not the best player out there, and everyone is going to have their own thoughts, but he is definitely essential on this team, because the Devils were missing that veteran leadership for a few seasons, which is why they weren't able to do all that well. Now, I'm not saying they had no veterans on the roster. A veteran that comes to mind is PK Subban, who's made deep playoff runs, but there's just something about Brendan Smith that's just so charming, and just like he gets it. I wish I could describe it a little better, but he's just a player that just understands his situation. He understands the team situation, and it seems like the coaching staff and the players are very fond of him. So that's my thought on Brendan Smith and his impact this year on the Devils roster. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts. What do you think of Brendan Smith? Has your perspective on him changed at all? Leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. So continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening once again.